But in doing that, to your point, asking me when I did something that failed before, like you're inevitably going to have that. So finding that balance of we can never treat kids as guinea pigs. That's unacceptable. So somehow we need to have the space to make mistakes for ourselves, but not have it be a mistake for kids. And I think that's something that's really important when the environment is a little bit wild west. And that's the stage we're at with AI at the moment.
When I think of implementation, I immediately think of Stephen Whiffin. Stephen is someone that I've known for, I don't know, 10 dozen years, something like that. And I think his greatest skill among many is his ability to actually take an initiative, an idea, and move it from pilot to an actual implementation. He's been very successful at that in his career. And in this conversation, I also get to know some of his other skills and backgrounds, whether it's a background in library skills and the way he's now taking all of these things to his new role as assistant superintendent in Coquitlam, a school division in British Columbia. Just multi-talented and really always balancing the need for innovation and security. That's been a big theme in his role with technology. Is he wants teachers to be able to feel empowered to experiment, explore, and at the same time recognizes his obligation to make sure things are safe and things aren't done in a way that's going to cause harm to not only his system, but his educators as well. Appreciate the time today, getting to know Stephen a little bit better. Again, known for a long time. I get a little bit of the background of why he approaches things the way he does and some of the skill sets that he brings that I hadn't previously known. So again, once again, a shout out to BC Education, and I hope you enjoy my conversation today with Stephen Whiffin. So Stephen, thanks for joining me today. You and I have known each other for a number of years now in different capacities. And you're serving as this role of really senior leader in Coquitlam. So how did you find yourself in that? It looks like you have a nice chair too. Like that looks like a really good chair. Specifically, how did you find yourself in that chair over the years?
I've only had this chair for a few weeks.
Okay.
And
But
not
you've been
because
sitting
this
in.
is a new office. I've been in this
Oh,
office for 3 years
there you
now.
go. There you go.
Yeah. So my background, I actually probably a little bit unusual in education. I started out in political science actually at SFU and realized that the only real future I was going to have in political science was either to get engaged with a politician somehow or become a professor. And so transitioned over to the business world. I already had done a lot of work with technology at that point. I was influenced quite heavily in my K to 12 schooling by teachers who were adopting technology at that time. So this is going back to the late 80s. We didn't have a lot of computers in the school. And I think sometimes one of my colleagues just yesterday, he's retiring, he talked about notions of timing and luck as being really important to get opportunity education. And I think I had a lot of timing and luck for these things. And it went back to before I became an educator. Is when I was being educated. I was influenced by some really great teachers who were excited about adopting new things and new ways of doing things. And I got pulled into that as a student. I have to tell the story. What at the time was junior secondary became middle school. Banting junior secondary at the time where I went to school, that was for grade 8 to 10. And at the time, they had some Apple II Plus computers. That was their computer lab. And I worked with a really great teacher there by the name of Scott McClagan, who just himself retired here last year. And I was one of his students, and he got a group of us together. He said, Apple's doing this thing to award a school a grant for this new thing called an Appletop network. And the schools didn't have that at that point. As students, he invited us to work on this grant. And so we did, and we submitted, and we won the grant. And there was two districts in Canada that got grants, one in Western Canada, one in Eastern Canada. We got the Western Canadian one. And at that time, the rules were a little bit different. So I can tell you that summer when showed up as a bucket of wires. And if you've ever seen Apple Talk before, right, it's BNC connectors and things like that. So a little bit technical. I was a student in the crawl space underneath our classroom, drilling holes in the floor. You can imagine that happening today as a student during the summer, sticking the wires up and through and wiring all these computers. So here I was, a grade 9 student at the time, doing the first network that this district ever had. So my background in technology in this district goes back that far. So I was really excited by technology, but it wasn't where I started out. And when I went to SFU, as I said, transferred over to business, you need to pick a specialty. And I'm like, Ma, why don't I do a joint computer science and management information systems? So that was my degree, joint computer science and business administration. And so I was actually trained to be a CIO in terms of my training. But I married young and my wife decided early she was going to be a teacher and we did everything together. So I'm like, okay, I'll follow you along with that. So I went into education. So there's not many people, not many teachers that had that background of management information systems as the background. And, but I followed her. We've been together since high school and we've lived in Coquitlam all that time. Made sense for us to teach in Coquitlam too. So came back, applied. Both of us are educators here today. And in my case, I started out in an elementary school teaching library and computer. And so that was actually the most important experience I ever had. Because when you start out in an elementary school, I was more trained for the secondary side because of that
Hmm. Right.
specialty
Yeah.
training that I had. And I always knew I was going to become a computer science teacher. But the first job opportunity was in elementary, and doing library and teaching elementary kids was an absolutely critical experience because I learned right from the very beginning, I was a teacher of kids, not a teacher of a subject. And I think a lot of people miss out on that experience.
Mm.
And so subsequent to that, when I did move on to secondary and became a computer science teacher, I always had a focus on the kids first. And I think that was really critical to my development. So taught for a few years computer science. I was trained as a Cisco network certification instructor. So I could certify kids as network instructors. So even though I had this education side to me, it was always connected to pretty sophisticated technology all along when you're doing things like certifying kids to be network technicians. But I was always in the library part-time too as a teacher librarian. And I think that was really critical for me because it allowed me to take a holistic and I'm going to say systemic view within a school. And so all of the schools I was in were highly engaged in not just adopting technology, but in adopting, for example, inquiry as a methodology that I was supporting as a teacher librarian throughout the curriculum. And I was put in a place early on to provide that leadership role within the schools I was in. And then so a few years later, one day, Doug Shepard, who is now superintendent in Delta, came
Right.
knocking at my door and he had been given the opportunity to open a new school, Heritage Woods Secondary in Coquitlam, and he wanted me to come along for the ride. And we were provided an opportunity by the ministry at the time to be the first one-to-one school in the province. And so that I was put in charge of that initiative. And so we did it. And we were the first one-to-one school, laptops for all the students. And things just snowballed from there. Soon after that, 2 years later, I was into administration. It's funny when you become a vice principal at first, this identity you have as being a technology person, it gets put totally aside then at that point. And that's when you're learning again. It's like going back to elementary school, right? Learning it's all
Right.
about managing kids, managing families, managing teachers, and creating community. And technology was totally secondary for me for a few years, which I actually think was again really important for my development. But sure enough, eventually, another opportunity came along. The district was starting an online school and they needed somebody to make it happen. And because I had this technology background, they leaned on me for that. I ended up becoming principal of a number of specialty programs out of that. They just kept adding things to me and became a district principal soon. And then when our director of IT left the district, our assistant superintendent at the time, Sylvia Russell, who herself went on to become superintendent of Maple Ridge, she said, you know what, we'd like to do our technology leadership a different way in Coquitlam. And you have a unique skill set where you actually could run IT and bring that educational. We don't have to have two people doing it. There's one one person to do it because you have that skill set. And I said, yeah, no, I would like that opportunity. So that was when I became a director of information technology at that point. And they gave me both an education team and a technical IT team. I always say my most important job at that point was to call BS on both sides. Both sides were really good at using their jargon and their real or perceived issues as being reasons why their arguments needed to win the day. And it was very hard for people on either side to do that with me. And so it allowed me to really bring people together in a way that we never had before in our district. So fast forward to me working it was at my title at that point was actually director of instruction. And we put this great team together, and we realized we really needed to develop some synergy around our approaches. And out of that, we pulled together this structure called the Conditions for 21st Century Learning model. And it's a model we created that had to inform all of our decision making. And that model made sure it was focused on making sure all the pieces, every single decision we made aligned with each other. And I think that is at this point, is my greatest legacy in terms of what I've accomplished so far, because we were really successful in creating that synergy in our organization going forward. So that's the backstory of getting
Yeah. No,
into
that was great. There's a lot of stuff,
um,
obviously things I didn't
3
know
years
about
ago. I
that,
was
so I
asked to
appreciate
become an
that.
assistant superintendent, and now here I
Yeah.
am. I have 20 schools and
Wow.
international ed, careers in transition, as well as technology. The adding things to my portfolio has never stopped. But
And one of the things I think is interesting is you start off with a certain strength by so you've got this sort of networking background, and now you're thrown into becoming a teacher librarian, which maybe you didn't have that particular skill set in you. And along the way, each of these pieces, it's like when Doug Shepard approached you and said, hey, you want to do this, there's something about, I think, your, I don't know if it's a confidence or just a vulnerability to say, yeah, this part of the job is going to be something I don't necessarily have, but you see, looking back, certainly you saw it as, boy, I'm ever glad I did that, because that gave me a new skill set. I just wonder about, as you're entering all of these new phases where there was probably some uncertainty, as I don't really know how this job's going to go,
no.
but I'm willing to give it a shot. Like, how do you attest for that kind of willingness to say, I'll give it a try, even though you might not certainly had the experience in each of these new roles?
So, the funny thing there, and this is the balance between professional and personal and how they come together. I don't know how many times I've been sitting there talking to somebody about my vision of the future and an idea I have of what we should develop and would probably be a good business idea or something. And then people come back to me years later and they're like, how are you not like rich at this point? Because all of those things you talked about, like we should have done that in a business. I've had people say we should have attached. It is because I'm risk averse. That's just my personality. I'm risk averse. But I think I'm also super excited about doing things that involve change that make a difference. And that's maybe a bit of an unusual combination. I know a lot of teachers who are they're either good change agents or they're actually outright addicted to change. And too often when people talk about barriers to change in in the system, teachers get used as an excuse for why change is not happening faster. I fundamentally disagree with that argument. Fundamentally. I have just as much difficulty slowing teachers down in adopting change as I do getting teachers to grab on to change. I actually find the issues, I hate to say it, but it's at leadership more often. That
Yeah.
leadership gets stuck in things and maybe doesn't embrace the change the right way. And I think my inherent risk averse nature that's built into me in my personal life has crept into my professional life. And and it's allowed me to see the pathways for all of the things that are exciting, but not get pulled into it at a rate of change that creates risk. And as a result, it's maybe made people a little bit more comfortable following along at the pace that I lay out for them.
Well,
And you see this in terms of my early embracing of our responsibilities in privacy, for example. in adopting change because I've always felt really strongly the worst thing we do to teachers is encourage them doing something different in their classroom. And they invest tremendous time and energy into that. And at some point, it becomes a problem, and we go and we pull the rug out from under them. And to me, that has never been acceptable. That's never been acceptable as an outcome. So if I'm going to present teachers with a pathway forward, I'm doing it feeling the ownership of knowing that pathway needs to bear fruit for them. It needs to be sustainable, and they need to be confident that they're going to be supported down that path.
So, a couple things that I want to touch on with what you shared. One, and I'll get to in a minute, you talked about having a systemic view. I want to talk about that. But when you're talking about being risk averse, I think that has to include the fact that when you take risks, sometimes it doesn't work out. Like sometimes it just doesn't work. So maybe there's an example of that for you where you had an idea or you were onto something that you thought was good. It's just like, no, that wasn't. And how do you, because the reason that people are risk averse is because they think the consequences are going to be terrible and no one's going to trust you. Like all the reasons why people don't take chances. But I love the story about a chance that you took that maybe didn't quite work out, but that was part of the experience.
Yeah, there's micro risk and there's macro risk,
Great.
probably is how I would describe it. And hopefully, and I think I've been successful at this over the years, is keeping it to the micro risk. I'm probably a good example of risk that maybe didn't work out. I'm just a real strong believer in the role of e-portfolio, real strong believer in it. And for a long time, there was a real lack of maturity in products around supporting ePortfolio. And I see so many ways ePortfolio makes a difference for the experience. It facilitates real discussion around transformative assessment practice. It facilitates change in how we report to parents. When we do ePortfolio, report cards become a secondary factor.
Right.
And when we've done it well, teachers end up in that place where they say, you know what, I, report cards, I don't have to have meetings about report cards anymore. Parents don't even care about them at this point. They already know because that e-portfolio's worked. But in the early days of e-portfolio, we had to jump into something. And so Microsoft had come out with this product, Docs. And so we started investing in Docs, and everything we were doing at that point, everybody used Word, everybody used Excel, everybody used PowerPoint. So let's adopt this Docs thing because people know Office already. They're going to be supportive of that because it seems familiar. It seems easy to do. It's a great product, by the way. And and we started building in it, building, and teachers were going. And then all of a sudden, one day, Microsoft came along and said, yeah, but there's no business case for Docs, so we're going to end it. And then we're just like, oh my gosh. So now this is exactly the opposite of what I commit to, taking teachers down a path, and all of a sudden, boom, it's gone. That's going to happen. That's part of the technology world. There is inherent risk in every single investment we make. Because when you ultimately choose product, you've now tied yourself to the product, and not everything's easy to move in a systemic way, one place to another. So you as an organization then have to be committed to understanding you maybe can't control the product and the decisions that the owner of the product makes. So you try and make good decisions around who you're attaching your wagon to, but ultimately it may change on you and you don't have any control over that. So you have to make sure part of your systemic change model includes being able to support people when that unexpected thing happens.
Right.
And you have to be able to support them with that. You can't say, we don't have the resource to support you with that change right now. That is, then you've broken down systemically if that's allowed to happen. And that's part of how you build the trust in the teachers, even if at some point this tool you're investing in isn't here tomorrow.
Right.
No, we've got your back.
That's right. And again, it's maybe easy in those situations to point to the tool or the vendor and say it's their fault. As a teacher, you don't
Can't
care whose
win.
fault it is. You just know that you told me I could do a thing, and now I can't
Exactly.
do the thing anymore.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
so you have to be able to respond to that and recover, if you will, from that to be able to say, all right, that didn't work. Let's try something else. Which leads me to my next kind of question, because Again, from outside, and my observation, your leadership has always been founded in the fact that you can take something like that and that you have a systemic approach to it. You aren't just thinking about this notion of pilots, which is can be part of a change, I sure, but that's not really, if all you're doing is just a bunch of pilots, we just do pilots. That doesn't do anything. It has to lead to something. So maybe just again, tell me a little bit about your approach to that and some successes that you've had in actually system-wide implementation of change.
So I think there's two things I'd highlight there. I don't want to play down champions. They're really important. We've leveraged them in really important ways, and we couldn't have had the success we've had without them. But the champions often tend to be those change addicts I'm talking about that I referenced earlier. And they're not always the people who are going to be the right personality or maybe right skill set to lead systemic change. And the example I give you is I've worked with some master teachers who rightfully will be skeptical of a new technology whose adoption involves them changing a practice that they've already mastered and already have great success with in their classroom. They should be really critical in us asking them to make that change. And when we do that, often the champion who has a bit of a change addict personality to begin with will dismiss that mastery practice that a teacher already depends on, and instead just throw at them a notion of student engagement and potential that a new tool may represent for them. And that's actually not a good enough argument for those teachers that really see a successful practice potentially being compromised in this exercise. And the champions aren't always good at engaging those teachers because they move fast. And as soon as they adopt something, something new comes along, and then they want to adopt that something new too. There's nothing systemic in that approach. What tends to happen with pilots is, who do the pilots go to? They go to those champions, right? And those champions will keep sucking the pilots in. I'm going to pilot this. Now I'm going to pilot that. And I'm going to pilot that. And those people just aren't always the right people to then stop, slow down, find out which piece of this is the new mastery, the new piece that if we master this is exceptional for kids. And then to be able to take that and communicate it to the group that isn't in that change addict type group. So we realized really early on, we need to shift the way champions are used in our organization. First of all, you can't have champions driving the bus on the change because they simply want to move too fast, and too fast for most people. So it's a kind of go slow to go fast type of exercise. That's really how we see it. Get the foundation pieces in place methodically. Build up the energy and belief of the critical mass of your teachers, not the people who are ready to go now. And then make sure you tend to all of the elements that surround successful change. That's that alignment piece of all your investments that I talk about. Once you tend to all of those things, and then you put energy into moving that critical mass, the champions have already moved on. That's fine. Let them go. Try and stay out of their way as much as you can, but don't let them interfere with the work you're doing with the critical mass. And so then that leads to the second piece is we did invest in a team, a support team. And so we have a team of 4 teachers, and it's led by a principal who actually engage in this educational change through technology in our organization. And in order to make that work, both structurally, but also economically, we had to shift how we provide support, technical support in general. And so we developed a model where when teachers are having trouble having things working in their classroom, they actually can help for support using technology in the classroom. And it becomes a first layer technical support for them, because about 70% of when teachers were putting in, for example, help desk tickets, they're not really technical problems. They're user problems, right? The user doesn't know how to do something well. And as a result, it continually leads to false technical problems, is what I describe them as. So it allowed us to streamline our actual technical support by providing a layer of classroom support. And that's the economic model that makes it work. And we created a help desk system that actually can differentiate a bit between what is a user problem or what is a pedagogical problem from what is a true, my computer's, there's smoke coming out of my computer type of technical problem. And that's created a lot of efficiency for us, but allowed us to have this team that goes out and is actively engaged in teachers, not just to help them use something better and relieve the technical issues, but supporting change in the classroom. And we've been really successful with that. And they are all about that critical mass that I talk about. They're not about the champions. Champions are going to figure their own stuff out. And they know when they have a technical barrier, it's a technical barrier. The
Right.
critical mass, they're the ones we've helped with that. And I think that has really supported systemic change in our organization.
So as you're talking about those leaders that you've brought up to support this work, I wonder about your thoughts on how you need a team around you. You want more leadership to be fostered. I just wonder about your kind of work around developing leadership. So how are you helping those people to grow into their own leadership roles and find success?
I think one of the most important things we did is this centralized team I'm talking about of 4 teachers. They they come in on 2-year contracts, secondments basically. And so we put them in a position to be district leaders for a couple of years, and we train them like crazy. We develop their leadership capacity. And then when they're done with us, they go back into schools. And the capacity building that's created in our organization over time is absolutely exceptional because they've come in, they've developed this real holistic systemic view of what it means to support. We've given them actual leadership training in that exercise. They develop tremendous technical capability because they're providing that first level of real technical support for things. And now they go back into a school. And a good chunk of them are going back in leadership roles. They
Great.
know they're leaving us, so they'll apply for administration at that time. And that's been a successful pathway for them. But that's great too, because now you have somebody going into a vice principal position that brings that technical leadership. It's fantastic for us. Even if they don't want to do that, a lot of them are going back into, we don't call them libraries anymore, they're learning commons.
Yeah.
We have If they're going back into the classroom, at least half of them go back and they're brought in as learning common teachers because they have a STEAM lens. So they're doing robotics and they're doing they're supporting that technology adoption whole school because and they're running a modern library at the same time. Now, of course, that's part of my view because of that background I have as a teacher librarian. And I'm able to put all of those pieces together. And that's part of what I did at Heritage Woods when I was there as a teacher. But that really is the piece that has developed systemic leadership throughout our organization because those people go out and do that and they influence all of those around them. And the learning that they've done allows them to develop more leaders in the buildings that they become part of then at that.
And it's always fascinating to hear district by district how they are intentional or unfortunately sometimes unintentional about growing new leadership, and it has obviously lingering effects, and because it's a little bit about, you can't just think about what I need now, like it's what's going to happen in 5 years. There always has to be a little bit of a succession consideration to some of these things because not everybody stays in the same role. And speaking of that, and you and I chatted earlier this year saying, hey, I won't probably be able to stay quite as involved in some of the
Yeah.
technical stuff because my portfolio is expanding. So, and back to the previous question I asked you about embracing things that you maybe not knew that all that familiar with, but you're willing to try. When you look at your new portfolio, can you just share maybe one element of it that you're saying like this, I'm really excited about, this is a newish thing for me, but I'm interested in what this particular area
For
might
sure.
offer?
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. So first of all, little context here. The very first email, I have 20 schools in my zone.
Yeah.
Our district is split up into 4 zones. So I'm one of the 4 assistant superintendents with the zone. And then we have one that runs our alternate programs and learning services, support services. And for my first email, when the announcement was made that I was going to take over this zone, I sent out an email. I said, I don't want you talking to me about technology. And
You're gonna be
that's,
you're labeled a little bit, right? You got to take
yeah.
that
And it's
label
my
off.
identity and I love it.
Sure.
And I don't want to not have those conversations.
Right.
But
Not
right
first.
now, the conversations I want to have with principals is about communities and about learning and about their school and their challenges and their parent community and all those type of things. And I know the moment we're engaged in a technology conversation, it's going to go sideways, right? That like it's going to distract from all those other things. So I said, I don't want you talking to me about technology. I've just put a new district principal in place who I'm trusting to have those conversations right now. And I'm meeting with her 3 times a week at this point. So I'm getting the conversations vicariously, and that's keeping me engaged. But that was, I'm like, nope, we're not going to do that right now. And that's a challenge for all of us. It's a challenge for me. It's a challenge for the principals because they're so used to engaging me on it. But for me right now, my number one focus is on that learning services side of things, supporting kids with exceptional needs, and whether that's neurodiversity elements or whether it's true exceptional needs, the student who is really challenging to integrate into a school environment and the supports that have to be in place to make that classroom work for a teacher. That is the single biggest thing that I'm interested in developing my expertise around this year.
So what's
And
your
putting a
earliest
lot of
new
time
learning
into
in
that.
that though? Like
Sorry?
what is your earliest new learning in there? Like you're like, oh boy, I didn't realize like finish maybe that's the sentence. I didn't realize blank, and now you've got this thing you're trying to understand.
Yeah, and maybe it's a little strong to say I didn't realize, but there's still every day right now, there's some aha around the specifics of the scenarios
Right. Yeah.
that allow me to think about how we utilize the toolkit in a much more focused way and I think way that's more meaningful than maybe some of the overarching understandings that I had before digging into this.
Right.
It's so I'm understanding the toolkit available to us to support kids in a much more detailed, nuanced way. That's a lot of the time I'm putting into investing, understanding that. And then the classroom scenarios where we have that teacher who's saying, I'm really struggling here. And how I can make sense of and it's the principal that has to support them. So I'm doing this, but the principal's come and asking for help to support this teacher. Usually it's helpful in the form of more resources.
Right.
And I'm making decisions about resources. So I got to be that expert in the toolkit in order for that principal to have that difficult conversation of the principal. These are the tools we're going to utilize here when they're begging for help. And unfortunately, we can't just always throw money at the problem, right? The pot is what the pot is. We need to utilize the tools effectively. And so in my case, I'm wanting to become really skilled at that toolkit that we utilize, but also really skilled at making sense of when the teacher's saying they need help. How am I understanding what the true problem is in that classroom? And that's really about doing a lot of listening around what's
Mhm.
happening in that classroom. So that's honestly, my single biggest focus this
Yeah.
year, because I don't think there's anything else I can do that will make a more meaningful difference.
And just even in some of my other conversations with some of your BC colleagues in this particular space, talk about just understanding the partners, the like the outside agencies and partnerships that have to be forged and fostered and developed and accessed, because this isn't just a here's a school. And I think this is moving beyond like you're the teacher, you figure it out problem. No, we've got a set of resources. Like your toolkit is the actual whatever, whether it's software and devices and people and community. There's a lot,
Community
right?
resources, health resources,
Yeah,
social service
it's
resources.
complicated.
Yeah, and I need to have expertise in every one of those pieces. And I think if only by have all of my success with technology has been in part supported by actually having pretty nuanced understanding of the pieces. And I feel like to be successful in doing this, I have to have that same nuanced understanding. The opportunity in it, though, is my nuanced understanding of technology. I get to bring something that I actually think is going to be really powerful in that space
Right.
to this. And I do believe it. I'm not pushing it on people yet because you know what, I don't want to be that technology guy right now, but I am seeing behind the scenes, I'm saying to the district principal and others that are supporting the work we're doing, when we're talking AI in the classroom, number one thing I want to talk about, differentiated instruction.
Yeah.
That's number one. And they've heard that from me over and over again. Start with differentiated instruction. Start with differentiated instruction. And so we go have those conversations with tools. Oh, you're struggling to differentiate instruction? Let's look at these AI tools to help with that. And so we're doing a lot of work in that area, and I've pushed the agenda on that one. But I don't want to be the preacher.
No,
I'm
at
pushing it
least
on my other people to be
but
the
as you
preacher.
said, at least not yet, so that it comes
Yeah, yeah,
across
yeah,
as you're
yeah.
just going for the easy solution because that's what you know. But in reality, and I think you and I both are seeing the potential of AI as reducing the barriers, right? So one of the things that I'm trying to contextualize is the difference between productive struggle and barriers. So there's teachers that are worried about AI because it's going to take away learning productive struggle, which is certainly something that we have to be aware of. And there's contexts where that's actually something we have to be paying attention to. But when we talk about barriers, particularly as you're talking about students with special needs, there's so many ways in which AI can remove a barrier that doesn't need to be there, that can fast forward a kid to some learning that they otherwise couldn't, whether it's everything from obviously language translation to reading, just so many. So yeah, I think the potential is there, but I appreciate you're in the precarious position of being the IT guy, but you don't want to be the IT guy. And yet that in some cases, the IT is, it could definitely be one of the things that we need to consider. But
Yeah, I'm
yeah,
still
no,
fortunate enough to ultimately be in charge of that and be able to say, you know what, this one has to be a priority, you guys. I just, to your point, one of the things I'm most proud of in terms of where we're at as an organization now, we're 1-to-1 grade 6 to 12 in our district. And still surprises me, like we've been there for a while now, and it still surprises me how that just hasn't unfolded in a lot of other places. I'm still curious about that, why others have struggled to get there, but we're there. And when you go in and you ask students, how would you feel now if you didn't have these computers to learn with? And they'd be like, I can't picture that. And then you talk to the students who have learning barriers. And for them, what we've done, they're not just feeling like it would be a problem for them because we take away the tool they rely on if we didn't have that one-to-one environment. But what they will tell you is, I just feel really good because when I pull out this tool and I need to use it to do my writing because I can't do it without it, there's a bunch of other students around me who are doing the same thing. And I know they don't need it, but they're using it anyways because it helps them with their writing still. And I feel like I fit in.
yeah,
And I'm not singled out because I'm the one kid in the class who gets to use their computer. And not just like writing's an obvious example, silent reading. We have a bunch of classes. You walk in for silent reading and half the kids have computers out and the other half had paper books because the teacher says, hey, choose what's right for you. And some of those children have reading assistants. They put something in their ear and they're having reading assistants to help them with that. And nobody notices because 4 other kids around them are also reading off of their computers. And not everybody wants to read off their computers. They got the paper book. That needs to be okay.
yeah.
And when the classroom works that way, we know we've accomplished something special.
I appreciate that. All right, one more question and then we'll get to a few sort of easy ones for you. But so this one's a bit of a hard one. And you've already mentioned a few different people in your journey that have helped you along the way. But I want you to think of one person just to shout out that you're really grateful for and helping you be where you are, or however you want to do that. And it would be bonuses if that person might actually listen to this and hear them shout
I'm
out. That would be, you get extra points for that.
pretty
But
sure that person will listen to this.
who's it going to
Now,
be?
listen, I have so many amazing people that have influenced me. And I actually think, just personally, one of my personal personality attributes that has served me so is I'm a people watcher. And from a very early age, I learned from people who inspired me. And I can give you a laundry list. My first secondary school principal, John Simpson, was an absolute inspiration for me. Justin Trudeau calls him an inspiration for him too. Like this is how influential John was. But in terms of where I'm at today, I wouldn't have had as much of an opportunity to turn my visions into reality as I have without Patricia Gartland, who was the superintendent of our district for a decade. And so I've mentioned several people up to all
Yeah.
of those people are inspiration for me. But Patricia was the one that had the faith in me to put me in the position to really lead that vision in the organization. And she gave me everything I needed to accomplish that because she had a fundamental belief in my ability that way. But at the same time, she recognized my gaps and then led by example to help me learn what it took to be an inspirational learner that sort of shot for the stars and felt like there was no limits. Patricia always feels like there's no limits.
Yeah.
She feels like the only person who can place limits on you is yourself. And that's it. And I really learned that for it. She'd always tell me not good enough. And then she put me in a place to celebrate the successes that we have. And so I'll always be thankful to Patricia for that leadership.
Yeah, no, Patricia, definitely those things, as I know her obviously a lot less than you do, definitely resonate in terms of, yeah, that's how she led. So grateful her for her service. All right. 3 quick questions to get you out of here. First of all, what are you reading or listening to now from a professional context?
Well, let's see what it read.
Yeah, grab it.
All right, grab it right now. Learning by mistake. Okay, there you go. Check it out. But the not a new concept. It's pretty timely right now when we're experimenting in things like AI tools and making sense of how we navigate an environment where there's new tools coming out every single day.
Yeah.
And you have to cut through 90% of what's emerging is hyped and never gets past novelty. And the fact that we have a certain responsibility to get past novelty and do things that are actually meaningful. But in doing that, to your point, asking me when I did something that failed before, like you're inevitably going to have that. So finding that balance of we can never treat kids as guinea pigs. That's unacceptable. So somehow we need to have the space to make mistakes for ourselves, but not have it be a mistake for kids. And I think that's something that's really important when the environment is a little bit wild west, and that's the stage we're at with AI at the moment. So I think very relevant. But listening to some great podcasts, Ezra Klein has a great series exploring AI right now. Recommend it. I subscribe to all the New York Times stuff. You get a whole plethora of great news sources out of that. But the Ezra Klein podcast come as part of it. And he's done a whole series on AI, delves into education, K-12, higher education, the connections there, the workplace, which for system leaders is equally as important for us to make sense of, but then socially. And the
Yeah.
ability to tie all of those pieces together in a single series definitely suggest you listen
Okay.
to Ezra Klein on those pieces because we can't ignore the social elements of this change. It is substantial.
Yeah.
And we are part of the social safety net. We're part of the social fabric of a democratic society. And I think as system leaders, we got to be attuned to how that's likely to play out.
Yeah.
And so it's not good enough to only read or listen to people telling the story of AI in K-12.
Yeah. First of all, I'm familiar with Ezra Klein. I didn't know he had an AI podcast. So I definitely will check that one out. But to your point, I'm glad you said it because it's what I've been reiterating to people, to educators. Like, if you're coming to this conversation thinking that cheating is the biggest thing we have to worry about with AI, you are missing it, people. Like how this is impacting us beyond the walls of our school is really the big thing. And then, of course, that translates back to how we are as humans. So thanks for that shout out. As far as what about something that's a little lighter? So maybe something you're streaming, something you and Jen maybe are watching. I don't know. Just what's your sort of escapism? It's like, all right, that's enough. That's enough learning for today. I need just to kick back. Do you have anything in
But Jen
that vein?
complains a lot because she's the only female in a house where, with 2 boys, both are young adults now, and even the dog's a male. And so there's a lot of male.
Testosterone?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. and what does it lead to? It leads to sports. I don't get a chance to watch a lot of TV. It's just, yeah.
Yeah.
And so inevitably, when we go down there, the sports is on, and then we have Whitecaps season tickets, we have Canucks season tickets. Add it all up, she's not the hugest sports fan, and yet she's dealing with it a lot. So I do feel sorry about that sometimes. But yeah, we have a lot of sports in our house, and she puts up with it. She's a real trooper for that. Yeah. So that, but
All
a
right.
lot of my downtime relaxing is
Yeah.
watching the
Well,
Canucks, and it's hard to relax watching the Canucks right now.
no, that's you're not alone. There's a few other teams that feel very similar, whether you're an Oiler fan or a Leaf fan.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know. Maybe the Canadians and the Senators are the only ones that are, of course, are doing okay. But okay, last question. You're a lifelong-ish Coquitlam person,
Yeah.
and you've actually taken me to a brewery and a few other places. But if you're a person coming to Coquitlam wants to do something that's maybe a hidden gem, something that I wouldn't come up on the first Google search, but maybe it's a park, a hike, a restaurant, whatever. What's your recommendation for a
Probably would
cool
come up
hidden
on the
gem?
first Google search, or certainly if you're asking ChatGPT, I think it's going to be. So first of all, Coquitlam School District is not just Coquitlam City. It's 5 communities: Coquitlam, Port Moody, Anmore, Belcarra. They're Anmore and
Yeah.
Belcarra, these little gem of villages right on the water there. Really beautiful. I live in Port Moody, so I guess a bit of a special shout out to Port Moody because it is a small waterfront community city. And then Coquitlam's the biggest of the group. They all have something special to offer. I think, though, if you're only going to see one thing, you're going to Rocky Point Park in Port Moody. And connected to Rocky Point Park is Brewery Row, as you alluded to now. There's 7 breweries there. You can walk to all of them. You stop at the park, you're looking over the water. It's just an amazing setting. And then across the street from it, this converted light industrial environment that's been converted to breweries and restaurants. It's just an absolutely incredible location. And the SkyTrain is right there. If you're staying in downtown, if you're visiting Vancouver and staying downtown in Vancouver, hop on the SkyTrain and take the 30-minute train ride out to Port Moody, get off. You're right at Rocky Point Park, and then you do Brewery Row.
Perfect.
Yeah, if you're not a drinker, maybe that's not your thing, but yeah, highly recommend it.
Okay. Listen, Stephen, thank you so much for your time. This was great. Just to dive a little deeper into some of the things that you've been through and are going through, always evolving, always learning, which is just fantastic. So appreciate your time today, Stephen.
Sounds good. Thank you.